here we are. Hey, before we get way into it, I wanted to kind of point out that we are at episode 100. So
yeah,
I guess our first episode aired around June 15th, 2022. So it's
yeah,
been a little
yeah,
while.
because we're what, like a month shy of 2 years of On the Move.
Yep. Yeah, worked out about right. We haven't missed a week yet. We're still friends.
Yeah,
We still enjoy doing it.
yeah, that was wild because we were like, oh, we'll maybe do one like once a month or every other week, and then we did the first one and we were like, we should just do one every week, see what happens.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
we
we
kind of
didn't
just
even
ran with that.
talk about goals. I don't even think we talked about that. We just kind of aired those first two back to back, and seemed like the right thing to do. And then I think, the confirmation was there as we saw kind of the best in the business do at least one a week, if not maybe two a week. Now, the one thing I've noticed, though, there might be only one other show that airs every week on the same day. Do you know of any that air on the same day like us?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot. The one that comes to mind is, especially when we started this, I was a big meat eater guy.
Yeah.
Steven Ranella's podcast. That is I think it's Monday morning. Like every Monday morning, there was a new meat eater, which is like when I worked an office job, that was perfect. It's just every Monday morning, 4 a.m., new meat eater came out. And then I know like another it was like a sports podcast that I still listen to a little bit, but I listened to a lot back in the day. I listened to a lot more podcasts when I had a desk job, but they would be every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they wouldn't miss unless there was like a holiday. But it was like that podcast was their job. They were sports reporters, and that was what they were doing. It's not like us where it's like you have the full-time job and then maybe you get the podcast once a week.
Yeah. Yeah, but at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to talk about our full-time job. I still don't listen to a ton, but I've really been enjoying the Sean Ryan show. Have you had a chance to check out his podcast yet?
No. I've heard that name. I don't think I know who Sean Ryan is.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I heard it for a long time, and I didn't know what it was. And when I finally checked it out, it's like, wow, this is cool. And then it turns out he's like one of the top 10 podcasts on Spotify. And he just rolled over 100 episodes, but he's been doing it for almost 5 years. And
I've seen that guy on Instagram a bunch.
Yeah, his reels have really been blowing up.
Instagram and YouTube Shorts. I'm like that guy. He's always in the dark room, and they've got like 2 cameras.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cigar lounge feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but what's interesting is his podcasts are very serious. A lot of war vets, a lot of really serious guys, but they're very interesting, and you can't help but learn something every time. So I can see why he's charting way up there. And isn't that amazing? I mean, that is a 180 from, the media over the last 30, 40 years, maybe longer. I mean, for the longest time, media has been short and fast, and important topics are talked about in about 5 minutes, maybe less. And now he's got these guys. He'll have somebody in there. I don't think he did this, but let's say one of the guys from the Osama bin Laden raid or something, and they'll talk for 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
That guy takes actual breaks. Like they go get a drink of water and come back. It's pretty wild. Very interesting stuff though. But anyhow, back to our podcast. I know we talked about having a couple of topics to give our episode a little bit of structure. Did you end up coming up with anything that you wanted to talk about in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned to my barn manager today that, oh yeah, we're going to record the 100th episode, and I don't think she listens to every episode, but she'll ask me about the podcast every now and then. And I was like, I don't even know what to talk about, because sometimes you're probably the same way. Like enjoy doing this podcast, but there are times when I think about it, maybe like 3 or 4 hours before I have to come on the show. And I'm like, I'd really like to just like sit on the floor with my dog and not talk to anyone for like an hour or two when I come home, as opposed to being on the podcast and having to be a intelligent speaker and have all these profound thoughts and everything that comes with that. But she mentioned, she was like, well, it's almost been 2 years. You guys should talk about, how the podcast has kind of changed your perspective on things. How it's changed, changed maybe how you approach your businesses or your personal lives or anything like that. So I thought that was a pretty good topic. That was something that made me think for a while, because I definitely, I think both of us are 100% different people than we were, 23 months ago when we sat down and recorded the first one.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I would say we come a long ways.
Yeah.
You ever think about that? If you could go back and meet yourself, like how weird that would be. Like if we could meet ourselves back at that branding in 2020, like watch ourselves ride, but not so much ride, but just talk and interact. Like what was important to us then?
The craziest thing is, no,
Still there?
Yeah, that would. Watching
you
yourself
glitched out
ride,
for just a second.
I can't hardly watch videos of me ride now.
Hey, I'm going to make a little mark.
Oh, I was just saying I can't hardly watch videos of me ride now.
Oh.
Yeah, you're a little glitchy now too.
How often do you video
I would go back in time and say, buy Ben Starlink.
Yeah.
It will be worth it. You just buy it, you pay for it, and buy Ben Starlink, and it'll be the best decision you've ever made.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm going to switch my internet over to the other one. See if this works.
Yeah. Okay. No worries.
All right. Am I still there? Piece of shit. All right.
Hey,
am I back?
You there?
Yeah. Is there a big delay or am I all right?
I don't think so. Can you hear me?
Okay, good. Yeah, I can hear you. Great.
Okay, cool. To answer your question, I definitely went through a time, it wasn't deliberate, but I just didn't video myself riding a lot. But lately, I've been I've been better. Speaking about my barn manager again, I've been on her. I'm like, anytime we're doing something with a horse and it's like, wow, this horse has made a nice change, you stop me and be like, hey, we should record this so we can send video to the owner, because I'm trying to get better about sending videos to owners. So because I've been trying to be better about that, I've ended up having more video of me riding out there. And so,
yeah,
when I send it, I watch it just to be like, yep, is this what it looks like? Things are going good with the horse. And yeah, so it's not like a deliberate film study, but it does make it so that those videos get in front of my eyes a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think I do it as much anymore, but okay. That's a good comparison. So back to your barn manager's original question, though, because I think that was great. That was good insight on her part. You want to lead with this and just talk about, I would say, I'm going to be like you for a minute, get a little bit more specific about details and categorize it. What would be, because there's a lot of change that's happened over the last couple of years. To start off with, what do you think is, if you could pinpoint it, what do you think is the one thing that has changed the most about you in the last, 2.5, 3 years? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like 2 years since the podcast.
Yeah. So let's
4 years since we've known each other.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, what were you doing for 2 years without a podcast?
Just doing all that. we were doing the podcast to like an empty bottle of Woodford. That was the only one who heard the podcast.
Yeah. So 2 years then.
Yeah. The last 2 years. So today we were sitting down in the tack room, eating a sandwich real quick, grabbing a bite of lunch. And we were talking, and she was like, oh, have you seen so-and-so? Like, this guy pops up on my Instagram, and I've watched some of his YouTube videos, and like, I want to show you this video because I'm curious, like, what you would do with this horse. Like, what do you think of this horse, and what do you think about like what he's done with it? I'm like, oh, okay. And, you know, anyone who's ever gotten interested in working with horses, particularly horsemanship, I feel like they've done that, where they just like, they watch all these YouTube videos and kind of analyze them, right? And sometimes it's very academic, and then other times it's like, oh, you know this video is about to go south, so let's watch this horse blow up on this guy, right? Which, right or wrong, a lot of people have done it. And so I was watching it, and I think for me, you know, I think part of it's been from the podcast, and the other part of it has been just being a professional in the industry for a little while now. It used to be when you like flipped on a video, I could be like, well, look at the gear this guy's using, and look at the look at how he's dressed, and like, oh, he's starting to do this with him, and he's using that kind of halter, and like what are we doing? Like, why are we even watching this guy? You know? But one thing that's been kind of cool with the podcast is like, we've talked to an exceptionally eclectic group of people, in my opinion. I mean, we've talked to people like, we've talked to Nick Dowers, we've talked to Buck Brannaman, we've talked to Aaron Vale, we've talked to a lot of people at the top of kind of a lot of different things, right? We've talked to veterinarians, we've talked to career cowboys, and we not just career cowboys that are like perfectly in line with us, but we've talked to Derek Chapelier, who's like a classic, like Derek's one of the handiest ropers I've seen with a 60-foot poly on a slick horn. And then we've talked to Dusty Burson, who's about as Texas as they come, right? Like the opposite end of the spectrum. And I guess it's just been, it's put a lot of perspective for me. It's been very humanizing. So my first thought, like, you see someone queue up something on YouTube and this guy's trying to help a lady with her horse. And my first thought anymore isn't like, well, what's he wearing and what's he doing that? It's like, oh, well, this guy has a YouTube channel and he's probably trying to like grow his business, and he's probably trying to help this woman. And, you know, he's probably learned from this guy, and he thinks like what he's doing here is going to help this horse. And there are things like, oh, maybe I'd like to think my timing would have been a little different there, or maybe I would approach it a little different. But I mean, golly, man, there's a few people in the horse world that are like this. And I mean, there's some nasty stories, so don't get me wrong. But like everyone we've talked to, it doesn't matter like what kind of gear they're wearing, or like where in the country they grew up, where in the world they grew up, or, you know, what, like who their teachers were growing up. Like, they're just trying to do right by the horse with the information they have and the gear that they've been shown how to use, right? Like, no one's like, well, I do this because I think it screws up my horse, or I do this because I think it's rougher on the cattle. And again, having kind of been the man in the arena a little bit now, where it's like, yeah, you know what's really hard? Like, making a living riding for the public, like making a living trying to get changes in horses to help people and help horses. So like, I watch someone anymore and I just feel like I'd like to think I'm not near as quick to judge, because it's like, man, that guy, I don't know, he probably has a family, maybe has a wife, like he's probably doing the best he can. Like, maybe he's doing this to like pay off a loan he took out to like start this business. Like, there's all these other factors where it's like really easy if you're just sitting in this little camp and it's like, well, that guy doesn't have chaps like me. Why am I listening to that guy? You know, that's just such a shallow way to look at it. I don't think I was a shallow person, but it's in the beginning when you're exposed to all this, that's kind of how you can think about it. And easy to do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think for me, it, going into this, I don't think I think about what I was like that much. But at first thought, when I think about where I was at in life when we first started this, somehow I kind of thought I had like life by the tail. Like I thought I kind of had it going on. Like even though I didn't, like I don't think I thought I was good, but I thought I was really on track. I thought I was like just getting ready to be great. And so, yeah, let's do a podcast and we can tell everybody how much we know, but without telling them how much we know. Like we'll talk to other people, but we'll be so cool because we're about to be great. And I really think I felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
And not in a real prideful sense, but I just felt really good about things. And the podcast, from especially the first guest we had, it started to expose my naivety. And I started to see the horse industry, but also life in general, through much more realistic eyes. It just kind of woke me up. And ever since then, it's made me want to apply excellence in more areas of my life, in other areas of my life. It made me realize that I wasn't so great of a horseman, that I wasn't just about to be great, that I had a long ways to go. And, God willing, things work out. But I wasn't on like a success track. Like that depended on whether or not I kept working at it and whether or not the right people stayed in my life and whether or not that was meant for me to do. Like it wasn't a done deal that I'd someday be a great horseman. And then there was a whole bunch of other things in my life that I hadn't even thought about yet that like I didn't know I was bad at because I hadn't even thought about it. And so
yeah,
I think those two things together, it not only gave me a more realistic perspective on life, but it just made me more aware of the areas that I was wanting. It made me want to start working on it. And like you, man, I feel the same way. Like sometimes we'll be doing an episode with somebody and like I want them to keep talking. I don't want them to stop because I don't feel like I would have anything to add. And then I'll have a question and I'll ask my question, but I don't really want to add anything. I want to listen. And same with listening to other podcasts. Now I'm kind of aware of what goes into producing a small show like ours. So when I'm listening to a big show, I can't imagine what's going into that. So I'm kind of thinking about their production while I'm listening to the podcast. And periodically, I'll catch myself wondering what I would ask if I was the one doing the interview. And I don't know. Like 9 times out of 10, like it's a good thing I'm not the guy doing that podcast because I wouldn't have anything to say. And I have so much more respect for people, like you were saying about watching other people work with horses in videos. I feel that way about other people working with horses, but I feel that way about other people doing podcasts or other people acting in a movie. Like I wouldn't know what to do if I was in their shoes. And in the past, I totally would have Monday morning quarterbacked it. Would have been like, man, why is he doing that? I would do this. And now, like even if they're doing poorly, because I can objectively see that. I can see someone doing a poor job of interviewing or acting or singing a song or whatever. But my first thought isn't, well, I would do this or I would do that. It's like, man, like that's really hard. Like even that guy's screwing up. Imagine how bad I would do if I was doing that. Like I would have a lot to learn. Maybe I could do it someday, but I would have a lot of growth that I would need in my life in order to do it better than that guy, or maybe even as good as he's doing right now. So just humbling, all around humbling.
Yeah. And I think if you're really trying to get anywhere in life, I think any sort of pursuit is just super humbling. From what it seems like anyway. That's been my experience. It's like You set out, you're like, I'm going to do this. I've educated myself. I've watched all the YouTube videos. I've read all the literature. I'm not going to make the same mistakes other people have made. And then you get there and you do it and you're like, oh, now I understand why it's so easy to make those mistakes, right? And I will say this. I'll kind of push back on you on one part of it. I do agree. There are times where the guests are talking and I'm like, I could sit here and listen to this guy talk all day or listen to this gal talk all day because it's really good information. But I think one thing that's changed, and I'm trying to get better at it, I'm really trying to make these more of a conversation and have a conversation. I don't have to make it all about myself, but it's got to be about me and it's got to be about you a little bit, right? Like we don't have people on this show to have it be a lecture where they just talk and maybe we'll ask a question or two. I definitely want to highlight our guests and have it be a good interview. And I want to paint them in a good light. But I've been really trying to lately be confident when I have a thought that it's like, you should share this. You should share your opinion on this. And instead of, I think in the beginning, we were very much like the only thing we did was questions. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like we were just questions. And again, that's kind of a more like nightly news, like interview type thing, as opposed to podcasts where we can have a discussion. And to have a discussion, it's like, well, let me tell you this anecdote from my life about how I feel about that situation. And in the beginning, I never would have shared that. And I'm trying to get more comfortable about doing that. And I'm not great at it. I was definitely raised in kind of a society and a culture where it's like, it's not polite to talk about yourself. And I'm not trying to make it all about me, but I'd like to think at least a little bit of the reason people are listening is because you and me. It's not just all the guests. And so if I have a thought or I have something that I think will genuinely add to the conversation, now I let it fly. Where in the beginning, when we had our first, I don't know, maybe our first like 20 guests, I wouldn't do that because I'm like, no, you shouldn't say anything. Like, what are you going to add to this person who has years and years of experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I was kind of raised in a way where maybe someday we can get into all that, but and some people know me better than other people do, but I certainly tried to get attention. I'm one of 8 kids, and now I'm not the youngest. I'm the oldest boy, but I definitely tried to get attention. And from a young age, I was praised for doing a good job. So I thought I was great, thought I was good at stuff. And I probably am good at quite a few things. But there's always a man out there that can best you at anything, right? So just that fact, you should be humble. Well, I haven't been that humble my whole life. And like I was saying, going into this podcast, my mentality then versus now. And so I think something that I've really tried to do, at least over the first half of this podcast, was shut up about myself till I could learn how to talk about myself through a different lens. Because I was so used to talking about myself in such a way that I felt like I brought great stories to the table about myself and my past. But I also thought that everything that I said about myself was like a lesson to other people. Like I really felt like it was important. Does that make sense? Like whether it's important as entertainment or important as a lesson or important because I've had this experience and you should hear about it. And
yeah.
And so I had to learn to really shut that down. And I think it's something I noticed editing podcasts, just listening to myself. and I'd get to where my voice would come on, and I might, that day I might have sounded pretty good. So I didn't mind listening to myself. Sometimes I sounded terrible. But it wasn't the sound of my voice. It was what I was saying. And I'd be like, oh God, I said that? Like, what a jerk. And I know it wasn't terrible stuff, but I knew what I meant by what I was saying. And I was like, man, like I should shut up. Like, what am I saying? Like they don't know it, but I know those are pretty empty words. And so I noticed that. And then I have some people close to me in my life that I could tell felt the same thing. And one or two in particular would actually say something about it. And I appreciated that. So it caused me to want to really tone that down. And now I'm probably trying to do the same thing you are. Come at it from a new perspective. And listening to better interviewers than myself helps a lot. Just hearing them add things about their life if they think it will add to the conversation, but not just adding stuff about their own life because they think it's important and they think you should hear it. And that's how I did it. Like I was excited when we first started this podcast because part of me was like excited to share my knowledge and experience with other people. And not like I wanted to teach everybody stuff, but I did feel like I had stuff that other people should hear. And so like I learned to start shutting that down. And now I don't really feel like I have a bunch of stuff people need to hear, but I do feel like I can continue to become a better conversationalist and add to the conversation and make it interesting and make it fun for me and you and our guest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
no, that's an interesting contrast. And I guess if people have listened by now, listened enough, they can probably tell that you and I are in a lot of ways very different personalities by that extent. Cause I'm definitely I'd like to think I shut down very quickly. And not that I'd like to think it, but I know that I'm very much a shut down if they're not just in the podcast, but if there's conversation going on around me and I'm not interested in it, it's just like shut down, don't engage, just walk away. Like I'm very just avoid interaction, avoid conflict type of person. And I'm not saying that's good. That's something I've been working on a lot. And I don't think you're necessarily apt for conflict, but I definitely think in general, you're way more apt to share your thoughts with people than I am, because I don't know. Again, I think it goes back to a lot of it probably does go back to upbringing. Like I was always you're meant to be seen and not heard when you're a kid type thing, and I'm not saying I think I had a good childhood and I think I had good parents. So I'm not saying anything like that, but you just kind of get in that mentality of, well, if you don't want to be involved in this, just don't be involved in it, and just walk away. And somehow that bled over to, well, we have a guest on. They're being kind enough to share their time with us. They're being kind enough to share all this information with us. I better not get in the way of them talking about good information. And so that was kind of my initial mentality, whether I realized it or not. And now I guess I just have more confidence in my ability as an interviewer. It kind of comes down to discretion, like you said, right? Like don't say something if it's just going to be out of vanity, like the whole world needs to hear it. But if it's genuinely going to add to the conversation, yeah, speak up. Like we need to have these conversations. That's kind of why we have the microphones in front of us. And that's bled over into my personal life. It's probably kind of bled over into your personal life too. So in a way, it's been like a really good exercise for both of us to have to get on here every week and do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting insight. And like you alluded to, a lot of these things probably do stem from our upbringing. And And that's where, like this podcast, I don't know if it's me getting to hang out with you more, or if I think that's probably part of it, because we watch each other work, but also the nature of the podcast itself, and all the things we've been talking about, how it's affected us. It's caused me to choose a little bit more when I open my mouth, and to become a little bit more like you were talking about, just chill just a little bit, because like in my upbringing, we kind of, it was different. Like I was encouraged to speak out. I was encouraged to speak my mind, but I think secretly I really thought nobody wanted to care. I mean, I think secretly I didn't really think anyone cared what I said or wanted to hear what I said. So I felt like I had to like burst it out there. And I always felt like what I said was going to be controversial. And it probably was at times. And so I've learned to just try to just kind of strong arm my way through a conversation. Whereas like, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but maybe like, because you were raised to be seen and not heard, when you were heard, you were like, wow, my words have meaning. Like when I open my mouth, it means something. And I could be wrong, but I think for me, like I didn't have the seen and not heard. Okay. Yeah. Cause I didn't have that childhood. You know, people talk about that, and nobody ever told me to be quiet. In fact, like I was raised to where like we did a lot of public speaking stuff, and they wanted you to share what you learned in Bible study or in class, or we always were presenting things, and people wanted to hear what you had to say. And I don't think, again, like I had great parents too. I love them dearly, but I don't know that was the most realistic way to grow up. And again, yeah, this podcast has brought a lot of realistic, just a lot of realism to my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't have kids, but I'd wager to say there's no perfect way to grow up, right? Like you just described your upbringing, and maybe it leans a little more this way. And then I described mine, and maybe it leans a little more this way. And now we're out in the real world, and we're kind of getting recentered into the correct thing. I don't know if you'd call it correct, but the thing that is definitely most effective when you're trying to have conversations that are recorded is don't be narcissistic. Don't make it all about yourself. Don't talk because you feel like people need to hear the sound of your voice. But also at some point you got to talk, right? Like at some point people hit the play button because they want to hear what you have to say. So there's a balance there, and it probably takes a lifetime to find all that balance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine. But yeah, whatever it is, we're certainly getting better at it. I was thinking about it this afternoon driving home, and yeah, the thought of hitting play and recording our 100th episode was really exciting to me. Like, it's kind of comforting. Like, it feels good to sit down and do a podcast. And in the beginning, now that's what's funny is when we started this thing, like my attitude towards thinking people wanted to hear what I had to say made it so that doing those first couple podcasts together was the easiest thing on earth. And maybe the Woodford too, but it was easy to hit play. I was excited, man. I was like ready to tell people how it is. And then after editing 2 or 3 of those things and having a couple of guests, then when like the realism of the fact that I was not the center of the universe, and that talking to people is not as easy as just like yakking for an hour and a half. When that started to hit me, then like sitting down to do a podcast and hit and play kind of shook me a little bit. Like if I'm being honest, like I was a different person when the button, when we hit play, I was a different guy. And it took me till near the end to get really comfortable. And I think that's kind of what it was, is I realized like at first I was just going to be myself. And then as we got going, I mean, I guess that's a good debate right there. I don't think it's bad to be yourself, but if you're being yourself on a podcast that you edit and listen to, and you realize that yourself is not really the guy you want to be, every time you do a podcast, you have an opportunity to work on yourself. And so, yeah, you're being yourself, but you are trying to act like the guy you want to be. And like, I would actually be curious what you think about that, because I've had a lot of advice in books and maybe like self-help videos and stuff like that. Guys talk about, if you want to be a certain way, like begin to act like the guy that you want to be. And basically you are pretending to a certain extent, where I've had some people closer to me in my life say, hey, quit acting, like quit trying to pretend, like be yourself. And my argument to that is like, if I'm myself, I'm a real idiot. And so I really want to be this guy. And the only way I know how to get there is to pretend like I'm that guy. I don't know how else to do it. And to this day, I still feel like that's the best way for me. And I don't feel like I pretend as much anymore, but I feel like, well, and there's probably bigger things ahead of me that I'll need to conquer in life. Absolutely. There is. And so I'll have to put myself into a position that I'm not ready for and act like I am. But there were some things, like, especially when we first started doing this podcast, even when it comes to speaking or just being really comfortable in front of the camera, I absolutely had to act. It was a little bit out of body, but it wasn't like I was acting. I was just acting like the Ben that I wanted to be in the future, and that be my real self. So I don't know what you think about that, or if you've thought about acting like the guy you want to be.
No, I definitely have thought about that. I feel like going back to how I grew up and the people I grew up around, again, I had a great childhood and definitely been very fortunate with the people who have influenced me growing up. But in this area, and it's probably everywhere, but like Southwest Virginia, rural Appalachia, it's definitely known for people who kind of like tell tall tales, right? Like that movie Big Fish. I don't know if you've ever seen that. But it's one of those things where you can, like, people will paint themselves as an image of like larger than life. And it probably goes back to like a cultural Scotch Irish, like bigger than life sort of, we're all human. Everyone sat around a campfire, like, the theoretical campfire, and told the story, right? Humans like that stuff. So for me, growing up, it was definitely tough. There were times where I definitely acted like someone I wasn't, in terms of, what I was said I was doing, or what again, I wouldn't say I was like outright lying, but I would definitely embellish, but I was like a kid, right? And I feel like every kid kind of goes through that phase. And something that was really important for me that probably happened around college was like, man, can you imagine if you actually like acted and did the way you tell people, the way you act and do? Can you imagine what kind of guy that would be? Like, that would be an impressive guy. And that's kind of like the person you paint yourself as, but that's like the man in the mirror knows that's not who you are. And so I kind of came to this realization that it was like, man, I've got a lot of work to do in terms of becoming the person that I would like to be. And this is what I think, because I understand when people are like, hey, be yourself, like be authentic, don't pretend to be something else. Like, if you come to a situation, come to a headway, there are definitely times, whether you realize it or not, where you come to a fork in the road, and the two options are, this is how the old me would act, and this is how the person I want to be would act, right? And to me, those are the moments where it's like, yeah, act like the person that you want to be. Even if you've gone down this other fork in the road 100 times. Okay. But if for whatever reason you go down the fork in the road where that's where you've been 100 times before, and maybe you let yourself down in terms of making that change, don't try to paint yourself as someone who's made the change. Don't try to paint yourself as someone who chose the fork in the road that you wanted, even though you know you didn't, right? I think that's where people find the disingenuous portrayal, right? Because who doesn't want to be better? Everyone wants to be better or maybe act a little different, I think, generally speaking. But the problem is, like, when you do fail, you just have to be honest about that and know that it's not the end of the world, and you can be honest and you can be vulnerable and be like, oh yeah, in a perfect, I don't know, in a perfect world, I wouldn't eat the birthday cake, but today I ate the birthday cake, even though I said I was on a diet. And, don't be dismissive, like you're not going to try to be better next time, but you have to be honest about who you are right there in that moment and be genuine. But then you also, when you come to the fork in the road, you're like, oh, this is the opportunity to be the person I want to be. And then you go down that fork in the road, right? Whether it's like I'm meeting someone new for the first time, you're like, hey, normally when I meet people, I'm like this. And maybe it's a little off-putting, or maybe I like do this or that. And it's like, I'm meeting a new person. This is my opportunity to, go down this other fork that I haven't done before. But then if for some reason you don't do that, be honest with yourself. Don't be like, you got to be honest about the process, right? So that's kind of how I view it is, yeah, you need to be genuine, but you need to recognize when there are moments to make that change in behavior.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what do you think would be a good example of, like when someone says be yourself? I just think that's an important distinction, because I have had people tell me, be yourself, just be yourself. Like after you did exactly what you said, like you recognized the situation coming up and you were like, I'm always like this. I really want to be like that. So then you act in a new way, and maybe it's the person you interacted with or somebody watching your interaction that knows you. And they're like, hey, why are you acting so weird? Like, be yourself. And you're like, wait, you didn't notice how much better I did this time? And they're like, well, but be yourself. Like, that's not you. And you're like, yeah, I know it's not me. Like, I'm never like that, but I'm trying to do it differently. Have you ever had that happen to you?
I can't think of a specific example, but I'm sure it's happened. I don't know. I mean, is the new way you're acting like bad?
Not
I feel
really.
like this stuff
like
is exactly like horses, which for those of you still listening, yes, we are still a horse podcast, even though this has turned into like Ben and Joe's therapy session.
Yeah.
I feel like it's very situational.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like when you
like
get,
it's depends type answer.
Yeah. I feel like when you get that feedback, you probably didn't pull the new action off very well. I mean, obviously it wasn't smooth.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things when we talked about having topics to talk about tonight, I was driving and I realized we've never talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not we do talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect tonight is beside the point. But in doing a little bit of research, I found this list of 4 effects relating to the Dunning-Kruger effect, or like learning growth. So one is unconscious incompetence, when you don't know what you don't know. And then the next is conscious incompetence, when you're aware of what you don't know, but you haven't learned it yet. And then you have conscious competence, and that's when you're gaining knowledge. And then unconscious competence is when you've mastered something. So I feel like maybe what we're talking about with trying to be a better guy or gal. And in the process of getting there, and at least for myself, like having experienced positive and negative feedback, positive being you don't really hear any feedback besides the interactions go better or the project goes better because you're implementing a new set of skills. Negative feedback being somebody goes, hey, be yourself. What are you doing? I feel like that's where you're landing in somewhere like conscious incompetence, where you're now aware that you were in the wrong. Or you're aware that you're not very skilled at something. So now you're trying to implement something new, but you haven't learned it yet. So for instance, what's a really simple example? It could be something like, when it comes to podcasting, because people are listening, we're already doing this. All right, let's say you hear the sound of your voice and you don't like it. So you do the next episode and you haven't taken any voice lessons. You haven't even practiced. You haven't really thought about what the right thing to do is. All you know is you don't like what you hear. So now you're aware that you don't like what you sound like, but you haven't come up with a plan and haven't gained any skills on how to improve what you sound like. So you sound like you're not yourself. Anyone that knows you is like, what's wrong with you? Like we're used to the goofy self that sounds weird. Like what's wrong with you? Be yourself, but you're not being yourself, but you're not being someone else either. You're just aware that you're not good at what you're doing. And so maybe that's where you fall in there. And then as you get better, people can tell you're not being yourself, but they can see that you're working on something. And then the unconscious competence is where you have mastered practicing being the guy you want to be to the point where people think that's who you are. And that is who you are. It's a new skill that you've gained. You own it. You are that guy. I don't know.
Okay. I've got an excellent analogy for this.
Okay, let's hear it.
And I'm going to share it right after I come back from going to the bathroom.
All right, folks, let's go to a break, which is not really a break. A break means that you get to sit here with me. And so while Joe's gone, he's going to come back and give us a good analogy of what we're talking about. But in the meantime, for anybody who doesn't know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, it's a study that was done by David Dunning and Justin Kruger in the 1990s. And so just had an intruder into the studio. The short description of the Dunning-Kruger effect is the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with limited competence in a particular domain overestimate their abilities, and therefore we come to the conversation we're talking about, and Joe is back. All right. Joe, I read everybody a brief description of the Dunning-Kruger effect. That way, if they hadn't heard about it, they know what we're talking about. But we're primed and ready for your ample description of the scenario of what we're talking about.
Sure. Okay.
All right.
So I feel like both of us have been around quite a lot of people who are learning to ride, right? Okay. And let's talk about like if you're learning a new maneuver. So say someone's a green rider and they're just learning to do like a cow horse turn, right? Like turning a horse on the outside hind, which I can remember how painful that was for me learning. Like that was really tough. And it's one of those things, not an expert at it by any means, but generally speaking, like the horses I start, I can like teach them to turn now, right? And so once you've learned something like that, you can kind of watch someone who's new, maybe at a clinic or taking a lesson or something like that. You watch someone who's new trying to learn that turn, and as they develop an idea of what they need to do, like, have you noticed how people, generally speaking, when they're trying something new, and I think it might just be anything kinetic, but especially in riding, it's like there's a real rigidity that comes with them trying to be really intentional about their aids and like where they place their body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like, for a turn, it's like, okay, well, like, offer a little leading rein, kind of open your inside leg, all that stuff we've learned. And they're just kind of like, and it looks real awkward. And you can tell their muscles are tense because they're like trying to behave in a way that they're trying to do the classic, like you got to do something you've never done to get something you've never got sort of deal. Right. And it looks awkward. And sometimes I know for me, it's like, whoa. Like the reason this isn't working is because of how tense you are. Right.
Yep.
It's like you're doing all the right things in all the wrong ways, and it's not, again, everyone's been there. That's a part of the learning process, but it eventually gets to like, you see really handy guys and they're like, yeah, you just pick up on them and turn the horse around. Right. It's like, don't think about it so much. Just turn the horse around, and they just turn the horse around. Right? Colts with like 3 rides that just start turning them around or whatever. It's like, yeah, don't think about it. Just do it. It's like, okay, but in the beginning, you do have to think about it because it's not like hardwired into you. And so maybe that is like the critique that's coming is, hey, I can tell, you ride around, you do all these other things, but when you go to turn around your horse, you like change. You don't look like how you look the rest of the time you're riding your horse, because that's like a new thing for you. And you're like rigid and like trying to figure it out, and you don't have your balance quite right, and you can't quite feel where everything's at. And so, someone could maybe see that and be like, hey, like if they've never seen you ride before, like, hey, everything else looked good. Whatever you're trying to do there, that didn't look good. Like that looked different than everything else. Well, what that person might not know is that 6 months from now, a year from now, you're going to get that figured out. And that's going to look just as good and just as fluid as everything else you do on the back of a horse. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you'll go to the next maneuver or go to the next thing you're trying to get better. And then that'll look awkward for 6 months, but then it'll be built in, and then you can do it on every colt. Yeah. Because you can do it without having to think about it. You can just kind of fade into the background and say, all right, just turn over here, horse, or back up over here, or, pick up a soft feel, horse. It's no big deal, and we've all seen really handy guys like Ray and Buck and just like all these people that are super gifted horsemen, and they get on these colts and it's like, man, it's like the horses just do it. And it's like, yeah, well, for that guy, like in his nervous system, it's just so ingrained in there. They don't even look like they're trying to get the horse to do anything. They just know how to do it. But you put a greenhorn up there, they're going to be like, okay, now where does my hand go? Now where does my leg go? What did you want me to do again? And so it's going to look awkward. And the horse might even react and be like, hey, whatever that is, don't do that again. But someone who's fluid, they'll be like, oh, yeah, this guy just means like go over here. No big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my theory on it.
No, I think that was good. At first, when you were describing that, I was like, man, this is kind of a rabbit trail. Then I realized what you were saying, and that did tie together really well. And when you hinted at the part about someone might be watching you, and they'll say, hey, that doesn't look that great. But they don't realize where you'll be in 6 months to a year or 10 years, however long it takes you to master that. And that ties back to what you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, how the thing that has changed for you doing this podcast is that when you watch these other people at various stages of their horsemanship, you're not immediately going, man, that doesn't look so good. You're thinking about where they're at in their journey, and you just have a new perspective on it. And when it comes to media and podcasting and probably horsemanship and some business and a few other areas, things we've touched on with our guests, you and I have dipped our toe in the arena. Like back to Roosevelt's poem about the man in the arena. Everybody, you have all the people in the grandstands, and they're all watching the guy down there, bloodied and bruised in the arena. And depending on how he's doing, they might be judging him or praising him. But that guy in the arena has a whole different perspective on the world. And if he was up in the stands and watching the next guy down in the arena, everybody in the arena might be thinking what they want to think, but that guy is going to be trying to understand what the guy in the arena is going through. And that's kind of like, that's that perspective change you were talking about at the beginning, about just not, it's not just not judging people, but it's having some empathy and interest in where somebody's at in their journey, because you understand what they're going through or what they're trying to do. And you kind of see the honeycomb and the, you know, all the staging behind what they're showing to the world. So yeah, that makes total sense. I think that was a good example. Hey, we're running kind of short on time, but one thing still along the line of your initial topic, you mentioned not only what's changed in our lives, but what are some things that have changed about the way we do business and look at the future. So I was wondering, could you share for yourself, besides what's changed about the way you think about things and just your personal life and some of the stuff we've already talked about, what has changed for you in the way that you do business and pursue your horse business by us doing the podcast?
Well, I definitely think we've been really fortunate to not only get really good horse advice on here, but like really good sound business advice. There's a lot of folks that have helped. I'll be honest, probably the one that sticks out to me is the first episode we did with Nick Dowers. Might just be because I feel like he and I maybe view business kind of in a similar light. I think now that we've like talked to so many people and seen everything that's out there, I definitely don't like stress about it near as much. I mean, I stress a lot. Don't get me wrong. You can ask Kaylee. I'm a big stressor. But in terms of, you know, the horses come in, we try to help them. The people come in, we try to help them. Maybe it's just a volume thing, but listening to all these people talk about starting all these colts and helping all these clients and yada, 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 it's like, yeah, I can do this, you know, because it just made me so aware of the community that's out there. And maybe there is one, but I don't know about it. There's not really like a horse training podcast besides us. Like there might be a podcast done by a specific trainer, but someone who talks to as many people that work in the industry as us. It doesn't seem like there's something like that. And just listening to all these people and their journeys, it's like, okay, I'm just another person on the journey. So
yeah,
I just don't stress as much because I know there's other people out there doing the same deal as me. And I know there's other people way farther down the road that got the same thing done. So
yeah, here I got a little visitor coming into the show here. Yeah, no, I think that's.
So what about you?
Yeah, well, first of all, though, like on what you just said, I would 100% agree that we've had a chance to get some really good advice. And I would agree as well. A lot of the guys we've talked to, it reminds me of the way you talk. You know, you have a background in those things. And so getting to talk to those guys and our own experience doing this so far, it's made me a heck of a lot more intentional about what I do in my planning. And like the old adage, if you don't plan, then you plan to fail. And so that would be the biggest change for me, is being more intentional and working on a plan. And it's kind of where I'm at.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And we got a plan for a couple hundred more.
Yes, we do. People are wondering why the cat's here without an introduction. But for anybody that has followed our Instagram, you've probably seen Lightfoot. He looks really happy to be here. He's getting big. We're giving him away. It's a giveaway. So just sign up and send us your email address. No, we're just kidding. PETA would have a heyday with that if we're giving away a cat on a podcast. But man, I think this has been really good. I got to run. I'm being summoned as we speak. Go make our rounds and visit with some people. But next time I join you on this thing, I'll be on the road. So, and we can talk about that at some point. But anyhow,
Yeah.
I think this has been good, though. Good recap for episode 100. And yeah,
we got
that'd be my big
to go.
takeaway, man. New perspective on life, a lot of things to work on, and a lot more peace. I think that you just touched on that, but I feel that too. A lot more peace and encouragement by talking to these people and seeing that they have done it and knowing that I can do it too. And knowing that there's other people out there in the world doing the same thing we do. That's the most encouraging part. So.
Yep. Feels good to have a community, and hopefully we're contributing to building that a little bit.
Yeah, sure does. I think so. All right, brother. Well, I'll hit end, but
okay. See you guys.
100 and 100 more.